Hello, my name is Nina. Welcome to NV Fine Art Studio. When you consider painting a landscape of a rural scene, it can very quickly become overwhelming with all the elements you see in front of you. If you want to develop confidence in painting landscapes, it is a good idea to practice painting its elements first. Today I would like to talk about two elements. I want to show you how to paint a rural dwelling and a cow. If you want to practice adding these elements into the scene, please find me on Patreon. I will be posting a real-time video with a step-by-step detailed explanation on this topic this weekend. I also have a few tutorials on skies and trees here on YouTube. If you are interested, the link will be in the description below. Without further ado, let's begin. Before we start, I would like to mention that I'm using Arches watercolor paper 190 GSM rough surface. For the sketch, I will be using mechanical pencil 0.7 mm 2B and kneadable eraser. Let's start with the cow. When you're sketching a cow, you don't have to be extremely precise with the details. Just focus your attention on flat horizontal back and rounded tummy, the shape of the head, 4 visible legs, but without too many details. I'm also adding a tail because I'm painting the cow from the back. It obviously depends on what type of cow you want to paint, but if you add black spots, it will help the viewer to identify the shape you are drawing as a cow. Now I'm going to quickly outline this cow with a thicker line, so it's much more visible for you guys and we don't lose this line while we paint with watercolor. In watercolor, we usually start painting from light to dark. Lightest value washes usually have a lot of water in the mix. So for this, we need the mop style brush to hold all this water. I'm going to use Dyna U number 3 Squirrel Mop Style brush. Let's imagine that sun comes from the left-hand side. So everything on the right-hand side will be in shadow. The only part that will leave as white of the paper is the highlight on the back of the cow. Let's mix our first wash. We're going to start our mix with a lot of water and cobalt blue and a touch of alizarin crimson. This is too much. We're going to remove all this pink and we're going to leave just a little bit to neutralize the blue. That's enough. That's plenty. A bit of water, and this is our mix for the first wash. We're going to cover the entire shape of the cow with this mix, and we're going to leave just a very fine line along the cow's back, hair thin line, and this is for the highlight. This is done, and now we need to connect this first wash to the grass and the trees. Let's premix slightly thicker mix. I'm not adding too much water on the palette, just what I have on the brush, and I'm mixing it with yellow ochre, cobalt blue and Indian yellow. Slightly thicker mix will give me slightly higher value. I'm painting all around the cow and I'm especially careful around the back where I left the white highlights. I'm going to add slightly cooler green mix on top of this warm green mix, and this is just to create some interest in the wash so it doesn't look as flat and boring. And again, I'm trying to be careful not to paint over the cow's back. While we painted the grass, the surface of the cow had time to dry a little bit, so it turned from very wet to damp. And this is the perfect state of the surface where we can paint wet into wet controlled. So I have a cream consistency mix of neutral tint and water on my brush, and I'm quickly adding spots to the cow. The first wash is done. I'm using a hairdryer to speed up the process of drying, but if you're working on proper painting, I wouldn't recommend it. Let's start our second wash, middle values. The most important part about middle values is that they have to be connected. They have to create one big middle value shape. So we're going to start with the tree behind the cow, and we're going to contrast this middle value against the cow's back, the lightest light part of the painting. I started this wash with a warmer green mix of yellow ochre and cobalt blue, and I'm gradually cooling it down by adding cerulean blue and raw sienna, and later by adding Indian yellow and neutral tint. The middle wash for the trees is done, and now we need to connect it to the middle wash for the cow. I'm going to mix cobalt blue, lavender, ultramarine violet and burnt sienna. Now I'm going to paint everything that is in shadow and connect the shape to the trees. I'm carefully avoiding the back of the cow to leave the highlight on her back and also the tail. The middle value for the cow is finished. I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue and ultramarine to the mix, and I'm going to connect this shape to the shadow on the ground. When I'm painting the shadow for the cow, I'm not repeating the shape of the cow, I'm just trying to make a few linear marks. I'm going to soften the edge of the shadow with a clean damp brush. Second wash is done, let's dry it. Now I'm getting ready to the darkest darks and details, and I'm picking smaller brush. This is a Escoda Perla number 10. I dipped it into the water and picking up neutral tint pure pigment. I'm going to add a few details to the tail, ears, eyes, and a few dry brush marks to the black spots. I'm also going to add a few branches to the trees. I forgot to add shadow to the tree, so I'm quickly gonna do it right now. It will be in the middle value, same as the shadow for the cow, and it will be connected to the big middle value shape. The cow is finished, so let's proceed to painting a building. We are going to start with a sketch. Same as with the cow, we do not overcomplicate our drawing with too many details. When sketching a building, pay attention to shape of the roof outline, eaves, and mark top corners of a few windows and doors. The sketch is very simple, but it has all the information we need and it doesn't restrict our movement. So let's start with the first wash, the lightest value. I'm going to start with the eave and I'm going to use warm sienna wash. Next step is to add a bit of texture to the front of the building, and I'm going to use this cool mix that I already have on the palette. I'm going to do dry brush marks and leave a lot of white of the paper. Next, I'm going to paint the sky. I'm using cobalt blue and ultramarine and the gray that is already on the palette. The mix for the sky is relatively dark to emphasize the light on the building. Now I'm proceeding to painting the trees. Very similar process to painting tree near the cow. I'm starting with warm greens, proceeding to the cool greens and increasing the value. For the foreground grass, I'm using yellow ochre and quinacridone gold. Now I'm adding shadow part to the side of the building. While this wash is still wet, I'm going to add a few darks wet and to wet to the trees. I'm using ultramarine violet, but you can equally use ultramarine blue or neutral tint. First wash is done, let's dry it. For the middle value wash for the tree, I'm going to use cream consistency mix but darker pigments. I'm going to use burnt sienna, ultramarine violet, ultramarine blue and quinacridone gold. And this is to achieve the greater contrast between the front of the building and shadow parts of the trees. Now I'm going to connect this shape to the shape of the shadow under the eaves and on the side of the building. For this mix, I used cobalt blue, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. I'm going to increase the value underneath the eave to emphasize the depth. I added a bit of cobalt blue and ultramarine blue to this mix. The same mix, I'm marking the windows on the side of the building. Now I'm adding a bit of neutral tint to the mix and painting the shadow behind the building on the ground. The wash on the front of the building is partially dried, so I can add the shadows for the windows and the door. This semi-dried surface will create a variety of edges, and that will add interest and the feel of atmosphere in the painting. I'm also using this mix on the foreground, and I'm doing a few brush marks against the whites, and this is to create an impression of details on the foreground. This wash is done and it's time to dry it. But before it's fully dry, I'm going to do a few scratch outs for the trees and windows. Continue drying. And it's time for a final wash, the darkest darks, lightest lights and details. I'm using Escoda Perla number 10 for this wash, and I'm picking up mostly pure neutral tint with a touch of water. Most of my attention goes to the eave, the windows, and the door. These parts identify the building as a building. And because this part is sunlit, this is where the most of the contrast is. This is usually the least noticeable part of the painting, but it always takes the most of the time to do. I'm making sure to soften the edge that goes into the building. This is it for today. I hope it was helpful. If you like this tutorial and want to see more of my videos, please like, subscribe and share. And I will look forward to seeing you in my future videos.